Hello there puppets, and welcome to another video. In this video we're going to be talking about linearity in video games and how, in my personal opinion, it seems like games are getting more and more linear with less freedom given to the player across time, generally across the board. Now, this is one thing that has sort of been brought to my attention a bit in Lies of P. Now, Lies of P, just for the record, is an absolutely phenomenal game. It is probably my game of the year, and this is absolutely no criticism directed towards Lies of P. It's still a fantastic experience, and it doesn't hold the player's hand. However, it is still a generally linear experience. You go from point A to point B to point C to point D, and that generally is how you progress forward in the game. However, this is always a problem to me in games, and this has also been a problem in From Software's games. This was a problem present in Dark Souls 3, where that game generally was you progress from point A to B to C to D, with some very few diversions from that strict path. However, when you're going down that path, it would be maybe one branch, and then that branch ends. It doesn't diverge into other branches. You then have to go back and keep progressing forward. There's a couple of instances in that game, but that isn't the case. But for the main part, that is generally how Dark Souls 3 plays out, which is similar to Lies of P. Generally, there are a couple of moments where you can maybe go on a branch slightly to the side, usually a very, very, very short branch of just a few rooms, not even a full area, just a few rooms. And there might be an extra boss there, an optional boss, and then you go back to the main path and progress through the game that way. Now, my favourite games never have that. To even move away from the Dark Souls franchise for a second, Final Fantasy is very similar in this regard, when Final Fantasy X does have a few extra areas in which you can diverge off of the path, which is why I enjoyed it. Final Fantasy XII was also a little bit more open-ended, even though the story was generally quite linear. There was a bit of freedom to explore some areas a little bit, but then Final Fantasy XIII comes along, and it's the most linear game imaginable. It did really well in Japan, but I never really liked it, even though I loved the story and the characters in Final Fantasy XIII. The story progression in that game, it was just, the whole game was literally walking down corridors and you could never explore. It almost made me feel claustrophobic in a way, even though I'm playing a video game, if that makes sense. And this is something that I really hate in games just across the board. Now, even games which maybe disguise it a bit more, I still feel its presence. For example, a lot of games nowadays, such as, your Last of Us and your Uncharted and games like this, which are very, very successful, these main big AAA games, I always avoid because they have that feeling to them. An incredibly linear feeling which didn't used to be present in games. If you go back in time to maybe the early 2000s, the late 90s, games for the most part did not have that. Yes, of course you had your side scrollers and things like that earlier than that, which were of course very linear, but I'm talking about that late 90s, early 2000s, PlayStation 1 and early PlayStation 2 era of games did not really have that. Generally, there was much more of a degree of freedom because gamers were not trying to create this cinematic experience, this sort of structured storytelling narrative experience. For example, look at the Call of Duty single-player campaigns. They always really have this kind of linear, hand-holdy approach to their games, which I really, really hate. It's one thing which I really like in platforming games, especially 3D platforming games. Looking at Super Mario 64, for example, Ratchet & Clank, the early Ratchet & Clank games are really good at this. To move away from platformers, Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City also have this really great approach which I really like, where a lot of the time you were given an area, be it a very, very large room, or in fact Dishonored is actually another good example of this, where the story is linear and you approach that story in a very linear fashion of moving from one point to point, as I mentioned before. However, each scenario in which you're placed in, you can approach it in any way in which you choose. That's a good example with Arkham Asylum and Arkham City. That's that kind of feeling where, yes, you're sort of moving through the story in a very linear fashion, but you can sort of make a few choices here and there in which maybe you want to go down this path or this path, and then on those paths you can approach those paths from a variety of different angles, which makes you feel like you have a good amount of freedom in the gameplay experience. Ratchet & Clank is also really similar with this, where, for example, the old Ratchet & Clank games, maybe you'd have 2 or 3 paths in which you can choose to go down, and then down those paths you have a variety of options in your arsenal to approach that scenario in which the game is throwing at you from a variety of different perspectives, which makes it incredibly replayable and makes it feel like you have a lot of freedom. Whereas again, if you're looking at Call of Duty single player campaigns, it's very much walk into this door, you have to have this gun, shoot these people, now move to the next room, you have to have this gun in which we're giving you, shoot these people, now you have to have a rocket launcher, shoot these people, now there's a helicopter, shoot this helicopter with a rocket launcher. Okay, there we go. They want you to have this very structured cinematic experience, which in my opinion completely defeats the purpose of video games as a whole. Because if I want to play a video game, I want to play a video game, and I want to play it. I don't want to watch something. I don't want to press a button at a certain specific time just so I can watch big explosions happen on my screen. That completely defeats the whole purpose of games as a whole. Now, I know I started off this video saying that Lies of P made me think of this topic. That's, again, no criticism to Lies of P. In fact, Lies of P does exactly what I mentioned Ratchet & Clank and Batman Arkham Asylum do, where yes, you're going from point A to point B to point C to point D, but going there you have a wide variety of options. You can approach the scenarios in front of you in any way in which you want to, which still makes you feel like you have a great degree of freedom as a player, which I really like. And that's the reason, that's the whole point I was making, was I like games that still offer me that, even when they're still told in a linear perspective, because Lies of P is still very linear. However, the freedom which I have with the tools in which I'm given means that I still feel like I have freedom, even though the game is being told from a linear perspective. That's the whole point of this video, and that's what I would like to see more of in games really, is if the game is going to go for a linear approach, still give me a variety of tools so I still feel like I have freedom in the gameplay experience, even if the story is very linear. I think this is something that games like, again, The Last of Us and Uncharted and those kind of very streamlined gaming experiences, that's something that I really would like to see those games do more, really, is because I've never really wanted to play those games, and every time I've tried to play those games, I feel like I want to move away from that. This is something again Call of Duty can learn from as well, it's something that Call of Duty used to do actually. In the early days of the Call of Duty franchise, it used to do that a lot more, where you would have, maybe you could pick up a few different guns and you could sort of challenge yourself to say, okay, I want to try and use this weapon in this mission or this weapon in this mission, to make it feel like you can sort of challenge yourself, and you can spice up the gameplay in a variety of different ways so it doesn't just feel like a predetermined cinematic experience where you press A or press B or press right trigger at certain times. I would like to see a Call of Duty game, for example, go for that kind of perspective where maybe you can approach this mission from a variety of different perspectives, but you're always going to get the same outcome because the story is still being told, like I said, in that linear fashion. And to go back to the Dishonored example from earlier, that's exactly what the Dishonored franchise does, where yes, you have certain rooms, but you can approach the scenario from a whole wide variety of different methods, and you can do completely different things, which can make it feel like a very diverse and rich experience, even though it is still linear. Another example of this, actually, in a way, is Hitman. The Hitman games are something that I've never really delved into much, but what I have experienced from them is that kind of thing, where it's like a big, massive open sandbox. There's a huge, massive area which is given to you, but you're always going to get that same outcome, but it's how you approach and how you use things in the environment and use the weapons in which that are available to you to try and get that outcome which the game wants you to get. And I like that approach in games as opposed to other, very linear experiences. And that's the whole point of this video. So let me know down in the comments what you think. of that? What do you think of games being linear, and how do you like a game? That's the main question, is how do you like a game to approach it if it is going to be linear? If it is going to be a story being told from a linear perspective, how would you like the game to approach that to make it still feel like you have quite a bit of freedom as a player? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment and subscribe. Maybe share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it if it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is Chaos Soul signing out. Have a good one.